There's something haunting about lighthouses. Alone at the edge of the world, surrounded by violent seas and endless fog, they've witnessed horrors no one should see. Built to save lives, some became graves for their keepers. Many vanished without a trace. Others were found dead under terrifying, unexplained circumstances. Tonight, we dive into the darkest side of maritime history, where isolation turns to madness and the sea refuses to give back its dead. These are 5 disturbing true lighthouse horror stories too disturbing to ignore. And if you think lighthouses are lonely but harmless, our first story will make you rethink everything. It was December 1900, off the remote coast of Scotland. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse stood on a lonely island surrounded by cliffs and constant storms. The lighthouse had been manned by 3 experienced keepers, Thomas Marshall, James Duckett, and Donald MacArthur, all of whom were used to isolation. But when the supply ship Hesperus arrived after Christmas, the crew immediately sensed something was wrong. The lighthouse, which should have been visible from miles away, was dark. No signal, no movement, no response. The captain blew the horn again and again, but nothing. When they finally landed, the place was eerily silent. The front gate was closed, the door unlocked, and the kitchen table was neatly set, as if the men had just stepped out for a moment. One chair was toppled over, and a single plate of half-eaten food remained. Then came the chilling details. 2 sets of heavy oilskin coats were missing from their hooks, the thick waterproof gear the men wore to face storms. But the 3rd coat, belonging to MacArthur, was still hanging there, meaning one of them had gone outside unprotected, into one of the worst storms the region had seen that winter. The logbook entries added more unease. Marshall had written about strong winds like I've never seen before, and noted that Duckett had been unusually quiet while MacArthur was crying, a shocking thing for a hardened lighthouse keeper. But what truly unnerved investigators was the last entry. Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all. After that, silence. A search of the island revealed nothing except signs of violence near the western landing. Ropes were scattered, a metal rail had been twisted from its socket, and grass was ripped up as though someone had struggled. It looked as if a massive wave had struck suddenly, maybe dragging 1 or more men into the sea. But there were problems with that theory. No bodies ever surfaced. The cliffs were over 200 feet high, meaning for the wave to reach them, it would have been of unnatural height. Locals said that during that same night, the sea was strangely calm. Even more chilling, keepers on nearby islands reported seeing the Flannan light still shining several nights after the men were last seen alive. Who was keeping the light burning if they were already gone? Over the years, theories have ranged from rogue waves to murder-suicide, even supernatural involvement. Some say the men were driven insane by isolation. Others claim they heard voices on the wind, calling them into the sea. To this day, not a single trace of the keepers has been found. The official record simply reads, "Men disappeared, cause unknown." The Flannan Isles Lighthouse still stands today, automated and uninhabited. Locals claim that on stormy nights, the light still flickers in strange patterns, and if you listen carefully, you can hear faint shouting carried by the wind. Whatever happened on that island more than a century ago, one thing's certain: the ocean took something and never gave it back. If the Flannan Isles mystery sent chills down your spine, wait until you hear what happened next, because our next story doesn't involve a disappearance. It involves a lighthouse keeper who slowly went insane, trapped with the corpse of his coworker. It was the winter of 1801 on the jagged coast of Wales. Out in the Irish Sea stood the Smalls Lighthouse, a crude wooden structure perched on 2 giant rocks. It was one of the most remote postings a keeper could receive. Once the supply boat left, you were cut off from the world, nothing but wind, waves, and the sound of the sea crashing beneath you. The lighthouse was manned by two men, Thomas Howell and Thomas Griffith. Both were seasoned keepers, but they couldn't have been more different. Howell was quiet, methodical, a man of few words. Griffith was larger, temperamental, and known to argue over the smallest things. The two had worked together before, but everyone on the mainland knew they didn't get along. Still, the authorities had no choice. They were short on staff, and the light had to be manned. For the first few weeks, things went as usual. They kept the lamp burning, recorded the weather, and passed the time by mending tools and writing letters. But as the winter storms rolled in, isolation began to wear on them. The waves grew so violent that for weeks no supply ship could reach them. The wind howled constantly, shaking the fragile structure as if it might be torn apart at any moment. Then one day, Griffith fell sick. At first, Howell thought it was just exhaustion or food gone bad. But within days, Griffith could barely stand. His breathing became labored, his skin pale, and his eyes hollow. Howell tried to care for him, but the situation worsened fast. The supply ship still hadn't come. They were trapped. A few days later, Griffith died. For Howell, the nightmare was only beginning. He was trapped on a tiny platform in the middle of the sea, with the rotting corpse of a man he despised. Now there was a rule among lighthouse keepers: never throw a dead body into the sea. If you did, people might accuse you of murder when you returned. But he also couldn't keep the body inside, the smell, the sight, the horror of it all. So Howell did the only thing he could. He built a crude coffin from driftwood and rope, dragged the body outside, and tied it to the outer railing of the lighthouse platform. The storms continued for weeks. Rain battered the tower and the wind screamed through the cracks. Howell barely slept. Every time he looked outside, the coffin swayed in the wind, banging against the wall of the lighthouse. Then one morning, he woke to find the coffin broken open, the ropes had snapped, and Griffith's corpse was still there, tangled in the remains of the wood, its arm caught in the railing. Each gust of wind made the corpse move, slowly, rhythmically, as if it were waving at him through the window. Day after day, Howell was forced to watch it. He couldn't go outside to cut it free. The storms were too violent. Every time he looked up from his food, from his logbook, from his bed, that arm swayed in the corner of his vision. Weeks passed. The food began to rot. The oil for the lamp ran low. Howell tried to keep the light burning, but the isolation, the fear, and the constant sight of the corpse began to break his mind. He started hearing voices in the wind, hearing Griffith calling his name, accusing him, laughing at him. The storms only made things worse. The tower shook violently, and each night he expected it to collapse into the sea. He stopped sleeping altogether, terrified that if he closed his eyes, the dead man would somehow come back inside. When the weather finally cleared, months later, the supply boat arrived. From a distance, the crew could see something was wrong. The usually bright, shining light was faint. No one came out to greet them. As they approached, they saw Howell standing by the railing, his face gaunt and pale, his clothes ragged and soaked with salt. And beside him, tied to the outer beam, was the corpse of Griffith, still waving gently in the breeze. When the rescuers climbed up, Howell didn't speak. He simply stared blankly at them, muttering to himself. The men quickly realized he was no longer sane. They had to carry him back to the ship. When they questioned him later on land, Howell could barely string together sentences. His eyes were hollow, and he seemed haunted, as if part of him had never left that tower. The officials determined that he had done nothing wrong, but they also knew something had broken inside him that could never be repaired. For years after, sailors passing the Smalls claimed to see strange movements near the lighthouse, even after it had been automated. Some swore they saw a figure on the balcony, swaying gently as if caught in the wind. The story of Thomas Howell changed the rules for lighthouse duty forever. After the Smalls tragedy, no lighthouse in Britain ever again sent just 2 men to an isolated post. From then on, it was always 3, because they had learned that the human mind wasn't meant to face that kind of loneliness. To this day, the Smalls Lighthouse still stands, rebuilt in stone, but surrounded by the same endless sea. Some sailors say that on stormy nights, you can still hear a faint banging against the walls, the echo of the coffin that once hung there, and the ghost of a man who waved until his mind broke. They say if you ever find yourself sailing near the Smalls after dark, don't look too long at the balcony, because sometimes in the flashes of lightning, you might see two shapes, one standing, one swaying, both trapped forever between sanity and the sea. If this story unsettled you, the next one will take that unease even further. Because while the Smalls Lighthouse was haunted by madness and death, the next tale comes from a place where the haunting never ended. A lighthouse where the keepers themselves claimed to see the dead walking among them. Off the rugged coast of Oregon stands a place the locals call Terrible Tilly, officially known as the Tillamook Rock Lighthouse. Built in 1881, it was meant to guide ships safely past the deadly reefs and violent waves of the Pacific. But from the very beginning, the sea seemed determined to destroy it. Before construction even began, a surveyor sent to map the rock was swept away by a rogue wave and killed. It should have been a warning, but they built it anyway, a tower of stone and iron on a jagged rock constantly battered by the ocean. The workers called it cursed, and after it was completed, the keepers soon agreed. The first man to take charge was Terrence Brock, a stoic and disciplined keeper. He and his small crew arrived in late winter when the sea was at its most violent. From the start, the isolation was unbearable. There was no dock, only a single hoist that lifted supplies from the waves below. When storms hit, they were trapped, sometimes for months. Waves would slam against the walls with such force that water seeped through the cracks. The entire tower shook like it was breathing. The men described nights where the sea roared louder than thunder, and the sound of wind made it impossible to sleep. But it wasn't the storms that terrified them most. It was the silence between them. During one calm stretch, the men began to notice strange noises echoing through the lighthouse. Footsteps in the stairwell, a soft knock at the door when no one was outside. Sometimes, when one of them climbed the spiral stairs alone, he'd feel a cold rush of air brush past him, as if someone unseen had hurried by. At first, they dismissed it as nerves, but then came the lights. One evening, just after sunset, one of the keepers saw a faint glow moving across the rocks below, a flickering lantern bobbing through the darkness. He thought it was a stranded sailor, but when he signaled with his lamp, the glow vanished. The next morning, they checked the rocks. No footprints, no wreckage, nothing at all. Over time, the keepers began to dread the calm nights more than the storms. The isolation gnawed at them. Supplies spoiled, letters took months to arrive, and the endless pounding of waves blurred the line between day and night. Some men claimed to hear whispers through the walls, voices that called their names in the wind. Then in 1888, tragedy struck. A supply ship crashed into the rocks below the lighthouse during a violent storm. All aboard were killed. When the weather finally cleared, the keepers could see the wreck from their windows, the shattered hull wedged against the cliffs. For days, bodies washed up on the rocks and the men had to gather them in silence. They couldn't bury them. They had to wait for the sea to take them back. After that, the atmosphere inside the lighthouse changed. The keepers reported hearing knocks on the metal doors at night. One claimed to see a wet, pale handprint appear on the inside of a window facing the sea. Another swore he heard crying echoing from below the tower, but when he checked, the storage rooms were empty. The men rotated every few months, but the stories remained the same. New keepers arrived confident and rational, only to leave pale, shaken, and unwilling to talk about what they'd experienced. In one recorded report from 1895, a keeper wrote that he'd seen a man standing by the light, staring out at the water. When he approached, the figure vanished, leaving only a puddle of seawater where it had stood. He described the air as cold enough to steal breath from my chest. Another entry, found years later, mentioned something even stranger. Last night the sea glowed blue, Heard a voice outside calling me by name. Sounded like my brother. He's been dead for 10 years. By the early 1900s, the lighthouse had earned its name, Terrible Tilly. The keepers began to rotate more frequently because none of them could endure the isolation. One man reportedly refused to leave his bunk for days, whispering that someone was watching him through the keyhole. Another, after 6 months of duty, returned to the mainland and never spoke again. Even when technology advanced and supplies became more regular, the stories didn't stop. In 1934, a new keeper wrote that every night just before midnight, he would hear the heavy footsteps of someone climbing the stairs. He checked each time, only to find the staircase empty. After several nights, he left the door at the top open, and when the sound came again, he looked down the spiral and saw nothing but darkness. Yet the steps continued, one by one, until they stopped right beneath him. He resigned 2 weeks later. Eventually, the sea began to win. Decades of storms battered the structure. Windows shattered, walls cracked, and the roof was repeatedly torn off by waves. In 1957, after 76 years of struggle, the U.S. Coast Guard finally shut it down. The light went dark. For years, it remained abandoned, standing alone against the ocean, an empty shell. Locals said the place never truly went silent. Fishermen reported seeing lights flicker from inside the tower, even though no one lived there. Some claimed they heard a bell tolling through the fog, though the lighthouse had no bell. In the 1980s, a private owner bought the rock and turned it into a columbarium, a final resting place for cremated ashes. Thousands of urns were stored inside the old lighthouse. But soon, storms breached the walls again, scattering many of the remains into the sea. The business closed, and the rock was left deserted once more. Today, Terrible Tilly still stands battered, crumbling, and defiant. No one lives there, but passing ships sometimes report seeing a faint light flicker from the top, long after midnight. Mariners swear that when the waves are calm, you can hear faint voices carried over the water, crying, whispering, calling out for help. The Tillamook Rock Lighthouse remains one of the most haunted maritime sites in America, a place where the dead never left, and the sea refuses to forget. And if you think that's just an American legend, the next story proves that even the calmest coasts can hide unthinkable horror. Because our next tale comes from France, a story of a lighthouse that stood witness to a series of deaths so violent and strange, it became a symbol of tragedy itself. On the far western edge of France, where the Atlantic Ocean crashes into the Brittany coast, stands the Thévenet Point Lighthouse, or what's left of it. The locals call it La Tour du Malheur, the Tower of Misfortune. Few will sail near it, and even fewer will speak about it after dark. Its story begins in the late 19th century. France was modernizing its coastal defenses, and a lighthouse was needed at Thévenet Point, a lonely stretch of cliffs surrounded by unpredictable tides and sudden fog. The place was treacherous, but essential for guiding ships safely into Brest. The lighthouse was finished in 1887, tall, narrow, and built directly on the rock. The first keeper assigned was a man named Jean Delacroix, a former Navy officer known for his discipline and solitude. For a while, things went smoothly. He maintained the lamp, logged the weather, and sent regular reports. But then one spring night, the light went out. Ships passing offshore reported darkness where the beacon should have been. A rescue team was sent, but when they arrived, they found the door open and the tower eerily quiet. Inside, they discovered Delacroix's logbook on the table, the last entry dated 2 days earlier. His bed was made, his coat missing, and the lamp was cold. There was no sign of a struggle, no footprints on the rocks outside. It was as if he had simply stepped into the night and vanished. They replaced him with a younger man named Luc Renard, who took the job without hesitation. He was confident, dismissing the story of Delacroix as superstition. Men fall, men drown, he said, but within months he too began to change. His letters home grew erratic, mentioning strange noises in the walls, and the sound of someone climbing the stairs when he was alone. He wrote that sometimes, when he lit the lamp, he'd feel cold breath against his neck. The supply crew noticed his pale face and shaking hands. In his final letter, he wrote a single line: "There's someone else here." A week later, the lamp went dark again. When rescuers arrived, they found the door locked from the inside. They forced it open and found Renard dead at the base of the spiral staircase. The coroner said he had fallen, but there were no signs of slipping. His body was twisted unnaturally, and his face frozen in terror. That was the second death. The authorities considered closing the lighthouse, but the shipping routes were too dangerous to leave unlit. So they stationed two men at once, Francois Morel and Elaine Rousset. Both were experienced keepers, and both dismissed the stories as sailors' nonsense. But their journals tell a different story. At first, their reports were routine, but then, as weeks turned into months, their tone shifted. Francois began describing persistent knocking in the tower's lower levels. Elaine complained of sleep paralysis, claiming he'd wake up unable to move, hearing whispers all around him. They started arguing violently. The stress of isolation and the endless noise of the sea were wearing them down. In one entry, Francois wrote, "Elaine says the sea is talking to him now. He says it knows our names." The next entry was scrawled in shaking handwriting. "He's gone outside. I begged him not to." When the supply boat arrived 2 weeks later, only Francois was there, sitting by the lamp, motionless. He didn't speak. The men searched the rocks below and found Elaine's body lodged between boulders, broken by the tide. Francois was taken back to the mainland, but he never recovered. He spent the rest of his life in a sanitarium, muttering the same words again and again. The sea called him. After that, no one wanted the post. The lighthouse remained empty for months, its light extinguished. But after several shipwrecks, the French Navy forced it open once again. They modernized the lamp, installed new safety systems, and sent a new crew. For a few years, nothing unusual happened. But the locals noticed that every man who served there seemed to return changed, pale, sleepless, and unwilling to talk. One of them, a man named Henry Lavoisier, resigned suddenly after reporting that he'd seen a man in uniform standing outside the window in the middle of a storm. There was no balcony there, just open air. In 1923, a severe storm hit the coast. The waves reached record heights, slamming against the lighthouse with enough force to crack its foundation. When the sea finally calmed, the tower was still standing, but the light was out again. When rescuers arrived, they found the inside of the lighthouse destroyed, furniture overturned, glass shattered, and deep gouges along the walls as if made by fingernails. There was no sign of the keepers. Only a single note remained on the table. The ink was smeared by water, but one line was still readable. "The sea is coming up the stairs." That was the last time Tevenek Point was ever manned. The French government sealed it shut. Since then, it has stood empty, battered by time and weather. But fishermen who sail too close swear they can still see the light flicker, faint and trembling, as if someone were still inside, tending the lamp. In recent decades, urban explorers who have dared to approach the ruins have reported strange experiences. Cameras malfunction, compasses spin erratically, and the sound of footsteps can be heard inside even when the structure is empty. One explorer claimed that while filming near the tower, he heard knocking from inside, 3 slow knocks, echoing through the stone. When he replayed the audio later, he realized the sound matched perfectly with the rhythm of waves breaking below. Some believe the lighthouse is cursed, that every keeper who served there became part of the structure itself, their spirits bound to the sea. Others think it's something older, something that predates the lighthouse, lurking beneath the waves, drawn to human presence. Whatever the truth, Tevenek Point remains a place of fear and fascination. On stormy nights, the locals still tell stories of the light that burns with no keeper, of voices carried by the wind, and of the sea that whispers names. They say if you stand on the cliffs nearby and listen closely, you can hear the faint toll of a bell, not from any church or ship, but from deep beneath the ocean. To this day, no one has been able to explain what happened to the men who vanished there. The sea kept their bodies, and the lighthouse kept their souls. If you thought the last story was unsettling, this final one will leave you questioning what truly watches us from the sea, patient, ancient, and unseen. In 1900, off the coast of Maine, there stood a lighthouse called Seguin Island Light, a lonely structure perched high on a rocky island battered by wind and fog. For decades, keepers rotated through it, each leaving with a strange unease they never fully explained. But one couple's story became so disturbing that the lighthouse has been called cursed ever since. The keeper was a man named Thomas, newly assigned with his wife in the winter months when the isolation was at its worst. The supply boat came only once every few weeks. Between the foghorn's endless moan and the crashing waves, the silence became its own kind of madness. To break the monotony, Thomas brought an old piano for his wife. At first, the sound was comforting, soft notes echoing through the tower, blending with the wind. But the piano came with only one sheet of music, one tune, and in the isolation, she played it over and over again. Weeks passed. The same melody filled every hour, every corner of the lighthouse. Thomas tried to ignore it, but the repetition began to gnaw at him, the same notes, the same rhythm, looping endlessly while the sea outside screamed against the rocks. He asked her to stop. She smiled and said it was the only thing keeping her sane, so she played again and again. The isolation deepened. Fog hid the horizon for days at a time, erasing all sense of morning or night. The lamp burned through gallons of oil, and the air inside smelled of smoke and salt. The piano's tune became unbearable, a haunting refrain that merged with the howling wind until Thomas could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. One night the piano stopped. The silence was almost worse. Thomas descended the stairs to find his wife sitting motionless at the keys, her fingers stiff and cold. Her face was pale as the light above. She had died quietly, still seated at the instrument. They said something broke in him that night. When the supply ship finally arrived weeks later, the crew saw smoke rising from the lighthouse. Inside, they found the piano smashed to splinters, and Thomas sitting beside his wife's lifeless body, muttering that the music had finally stopped. The report said he was taken away, incoherent, his mind shattered. He never spoke again. But the story didn't end there. Decades later, keepers who stayed on Seguin Island began reporting strange sounds, faint music drifting through the fog at night. Visitors claimed they heard piano notes echoing from the empty tower, even when the lantern was long extinguished. Some swore they saw a shadow moving in the keeper's quarters, a woman, seated before an invisible instrument, playing a melody that no one alive remembered. In the 1970s, when the lighthouse was automated, one of the last Coast Guardsmen on duty claimed that during his final night, as he packed his things to leave, the sound of a piano rose faintly beneath the howl of the wind. He said it followed him down the dock, the notes perfectly clear, as though someone were bidding him goodbye. When he turned back, the light in the tower flickered once and went out. Seguin Island Light remains one of Maine's oldest lighthouses, but no keeper has ever stayed long since. Even now, boaters say that on fog-heavy nights, if you drift close enough, you can hear faint music through the mist, a piano melody carried by the wind, looping endlessly, waiting for someone to listen. No one knows what tune it was. No one ever found the sheet music. And perhaps that's for the best, because those who have tried to play it claim that once you start, you'll never stop hearing it, even when the sea is quiet, even when you're miles from shore. They say the light still burns at Seguin on stormy nights, even though it was decommissioned years ago. Some believe it's just the reflection of distant ships. Others say it's Thomas, still keeping the light for his lost wife, trapped in an endless loop of duty and grief. But there's one thing everyone agrees on. If you're ever near Seguin Island and you hear faint piano notes rising above the waves, don't follow them. Don't try to find where they're coming from, because if you do, the music might not let you leave. And as the sea swallows the last note, you'll realize some melodies were never meant to end. You've heard the whispers of the sea tonight. Subscribe before dawn. The next story might already be calling your name.